Hi, you're listening to This Is Not Your Practice Life. I'm your host, Macy Renee, and we are going on a journey together, my friends. I'm a certified life and emotional intelligence coach. And if you really want to step into your highest self, there are a few non-negotiables you're going to have to learn, and I am just the person to help you do it. No matter your past, I'm here to help you create a more fulfilling future. So stick around with me. Not only will I teach you how to navigate your brain's daily mind drama, but I'll help you actually understand your mind, your emotions, why you do the things you do, and why others do the things they do. Most importantly, I'll help you build the self-awareness skills to create whatever results you want. It's never too late to change the trajectory of your life. After all, this is not your practice life. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of This Is Not Your Practice Life podcast. My name is Macy, and I am so thrilled you are joining me today. If you are a brand new listener, welcome to the podcast. I hope that you like what you hear, and I highly encourage you to go back to the very beginning if you're up for the challenge, because the episodes really do build upon each other. However, with that being said, if you do that, I do encourage you to come back every now and then and listen to some recent episodes so that you don't miss any sort of freebies or announcements or discounts if they're being, ran. I really don't want you to miss out on all the goodies of the now, but I do encourage you to go back to the beginning and learn a little bit more about me and get your foundational knowledge and then build upon it with each episode. Okay, so I'm so excited that you're here. I did not do a podcast episode last week because I was sick. It's that moment where you can tell you're going to have a sore throat and then you end up with a sore throat and it feels like you're swallowing knives, and then all the congestion. You can probably still hear my nasally sinuses and scratchy throat. I didn't want to leave you all with another week of not having an episode, so I am on here. I don't know that it'll be my longest episode, but hopefully valuable nonetheless. And so I want to talk to you guys about the power of vulnerability. I actually was on my Facebook memories and saw a post about a podcast episode that I did years ago about resistance to vulnerability. And, a lot has transpired in the last 3 years. I've grown as a person, my audience and clients and everybody that listens to this has grown. And I just kind of want to bring a fresh, updated kind of thought process to vulnerability. Not that I think it's changed a ton since the episode that I did on resistance to vulnerability a couple of years ago, but I think it's an interesting topic to bring up because it's still something that I see my clients, even clients I've worked with for many years, struggle with. And to be completely honest, it's hard for me at times too. So let's just talk about the power of vulnerability though, and really what it means to be vulnerable and why it can be such a force in such a good way in your life. So vulnerability, and this is just my definition. I'm not going to get on Google and look up the official definition, but when I think of vulnerability, I really think of allowing ourselves to be fully seen in our truth and our messiness. And it feels a lot of times, the way that I describe it, as standing in an arena or on a stage and being stark naked, truly, and being surrounded with people who have their eyes and ears on you and feeling just completely exposed, okay? And so vulnerability is one of those really hard things because it's also when people see us in our truth. And sometimes that truth doesn't feel perfectly curated or really isn't perfectly curated, and it's not always what society deems as acceptable or even appropriate, right? So people struggle with this. People struggle with vulnerability and being seen in their truth because also the byproduct of being vulnerable and really owning up to who you are or what you're thinking or what you're feeling or what you're experiencing, something that you've done, like the vulnerability in that is oftentimes this very fragile feeling where everyone that is witnessing that vulnerability gets to have their own thoughts and feelings and judgments and actions around it. Okay. And so I think that that is oftentimes what makes living in our truth so very hard, is that once we've opened the door to vulnerability, whether that is to a significant other or a friend or a family member or a coworker or a stranger, we've also opened ourselves up to the fact that they, as an independently minded person, right, gets to think whatever they want to think. They get to feel whatever they want to feel. They could possibly have judgments. They could disagree. They could abandon. They could totally have a reaction that could possibly make us feel even more icky than the vulnerability itself. But all of this to say is that I truly believe that being vulnerable is one of the most powerful things that we can do. Whether you are being vulnerable in a very safe place, like a therapy office or a coaching container, or you're being vulnerable with someone that you really love and care about, or you're practicing vulnerability for the sake of yourself. And I'm gonna talk about what this means. For a lot of my life, I held so much internally. I grew up with a not so typical childhood. I don't know if many people do these days, but childhood at different times was rough and not okay, according to therapy, right? Just not okay, not normal. And I've been told more than once that it's amazing that I've turned out the way that I am, considering everything that I've seen, heard, and experienced throughout my childhood and young adult life. And all of those experiences being hard, at times traumatic, very life altering for me, creating anxieties, at times depressive episodes, PTSD in many ways. All of those things and all of those stories are very tender and very vulnerable. And for most of my life, what I did was internalize all of it. Now, I had a therapist starting at age 6, and I saw a therapist or counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist all the way up until I was 23. So 17 years, I saw someone or I talked to someone, and that's where I was vulnerable. And I was also vulnerable to a certain extent with, friends. But what was interesting is that when I hit my early 20s, I really, truly felt like caged, if that makes sense. Very caged in that I felt like I was silent to protect people that had created a lot of the turmoil in my life. And it honestly felt like, and it took many years to find the words to say this, but there were times where it felt like everything I was internalizing was like swallowing poison for the sake of their names and lives being seen as clean, right? Protecting them. And in a way, feeling like if I protected them, I was protecting myself. But at the same time, it also felt very heavy to carry. It felt like a big burden to basically show up in the world with this facade that everything was okay. And, I really held it together on the outside and navigated life as normal looking as I could. In fact, a lot of my trauma, played a part in my drive. And maybe you can relate to this, right? If you've experienced any kind of childhood hardship or young adult hardship where you either fall into those cycles that you were brought up around or that you've experienced, or you almost go the extreme opposite to try and create a totally different life for yourself, even if all of those actions are, kind of driving you a different kind of crazy, right? Or driving you into a different kind of toxic spiral. And for me, what mine was, perfectionism, being the AB student, being a high achiever, being very meticulous in everything that I did, being the good girl, being the people pleaser, being the teacher's pet. Like, it made me into all of these things and play all of these roles that allowed me to survive and be patted on my back that everything was okay. And it also, on the outside, created this level of things appearing very normal and it looking like I had it all together and it looking like, life was a fairy tale, when really behind closed doors, especially behind, that family dynamic, it was at times really, really toxic and not okay and very hard and felt like it was crumbling to pieces. And I felt like I was crumbling to pieces. But people wouldn't have known, especially in my early 20s for a long time, that it felt like I was carrying 40,000 pounds of weight on my shoulders. And I eventually got to the point where I just couldn't. I couldn't carry it anymore, and I was 24 whenever I found my life coach. I did not even think that I wanted a life coach. I didn't even know what a life coach was. And I know I've shared this story a few times on my podcast, so I will spare you today. But the long story short is that I hired her, and it absolutely changed everything about my life. I had vented about my hardship my entire life. In every therapy counseling session, I vented over and over and over again. It was like being on a hamster wheel. Every new therapist too, you start all over. You start from the beginning. You rehash the story over and over again. And I'm so thankful for that because it helped me process a lot, like repeating over and over and over again, and being asked questions that made me think about more childhood things helped me process a lot. But what was different when I found my coach and started working with her is that I had never been taught about my mind and my brain and feelings and emotions and the importance of uncovering them and feeling them. Like, with my therapist, I had been very vulnerable, but I was not vulnerable beyond those four walls. Vulnerability beyond the therapy couch in the therapy office felt way too scary. What felt comfortable at the time was the outside world, people in high school, people in college, people passing by on a street, right? Seeing a very curated version that I wanted them to see so that I didn't have to practice vulnerability, so that I didn't have to be honest, so that I didn't have to actually feel my feelings, and that I didn't ever have to face my biggest fear, which was abandonment if I was honest, right? If I let you see what my life is really like, would you even want to be my friend? If I let you in on what really happens behind closed doors, would you ever want to come around again, or would you just abandon me altogether? If I let you see what my life is really like, would you talk about me behind my back? Would you, bully or be mean? Would you judge my family? Would you judge me? Like, there were all of these things I was afraid of. And pulling away, what it really was is that I had not been vulnerable enough with myself. What I mean by that is I didn't know how to feel my emotions. I buried my emotions. I numbed my emotions. I never did any kind of like drugs, or I never turned to alcohol, really, like especially when I was young, to cope with anything, it was always my phone. It was social media, or it was being busy. So like before social media really blew up, because I feel like social media got big in maybe like 2008. It started to get big in 2008, 2009. It was like MySpace days. Before I was really into that, I would just be busy. I would be gone all the time. I was constantly at my friend's house or had friends over. I could not sit still. Sitting still was the epitome of self-torture back then. And I didn't realize, and I never had a therapist tell me, that the reason that I was such a busybody was because I couldn't be left alone with my own brain. I could not be left alone with my own mind. I would go crazy if that was the case. And so I just drowned it in being busy, and I drowned it in like servant leadership, right? I helped everybody. If someone needed me, it didn't matter how exhausted I was. It didn't matter if I was lacking sleep. It didn't matter what my needs were. If someone needed me, I was going to be there for them, because every time I could exit my own situation or exit my own mind, my own body, that meant I didn't have to face any of the ick. I didn't have to be vulnerable with myself. I didn't have to feel the emotions. And so the difference for me whenever I met my coach was that she really enforced me understanding my mind and me understanding my behaviors and me having to sit with those emotions. I remember one of the very first things that she taught me was, Macy, you need to sit with your feelings and feel your feelings. And I just looked at her like she was crazy. I was like, feel my what? What are you talking about? Feel my feelings. What does that even mean? And she was like, you need to feel your feelings. I can tell that you don't, like you avoid it. You won't cry. You try to hold back whenever you're going to start crying. You get really silent. You know, you cover yourself up. I would almost like hide my eyes. I didn't want anybody to look at me whenever I had those vulnerable moments. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want anybody in my, group coaching program to really know my story, because I was afraid if they knew how much of a hot mess I felt like I was, that it wasn't going to be safe. I wasn't going to be loved. I felt like I had to be perfect and I had to be something that I wasn't, in order to fit in. And that's how I lived a lot of my life up until I was 24 years old. And I started learning everything that you will learn on this podcast if you continue to listen. And especially the work that you will learn if you ever decide to take it from the podcast to actual coaching. Because if there's one thing that I hear my clients say all the time when they start working with me, so they will hire me for one-on-one coaching, or they'll get into one of my coaching containers that I offer, and it never fails that 2 to 3 weeks in, when it starts to feel really vulnerable and kind of harder than they expected, they always say the same thing. And that statement is, this doesn't feel like the podcast. And I always laugh because I'm like, of course, on the podcast, you get to be passive. You get to put in an earbud, or you get to turn it on in the car, and you get to listen to my voice, and you get to learn information until, and you get to consume it while you're cleaning or cooking or driving to your destination. And as soon as you arrive and I'm no longer in your ears, you don't really have to apply the work if you don't want to. You don't really have to explore your stuff. You're not being asked hard questions. You're not having your thoughts questioned. You don't have anybody holding you accountable. You don't have anybody that is, prompting you along or really digging deep or helping you dig deep. You don't have that, right? Podcast listening at the end of the day while you learn a lot is passive. When you decide that you're going to actually hire a coach, whether that's me or someone else, it's a different ballgame. And so it never fails that my clients are always like, oh, this is not like it was on the podcast. This is harder. I'm like, yeah, because I'm getting all in your business, right? I have to know what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And, if you cry while you're listening to a podcast, you can just cry and nobody has to see you. But that vulnerability is powerful, because sometimes, you guys, this is what I found to be true for me. It's the first time you're really seeing and meeting yourself. It's the first time someone has cracked away at the armor that you have held onto for most of your life. It's the first time your guard gets to be let down for you to even really see, who am I? What do I want? Why have I been showing up this way? Why do I believe this about myself? Why am I having such a hard time feeling my feelings? Why am I so afraid? Why am I tolerating certain things? Why am I people pleasing? Why? For some people and for a lot of people and a lot of my clients, it's the first time you really start to uncover who you are without all the conditioning, without society's standards, without the people who have been used to you showing up in a certain way. And maybe you've been showing up that certain way because it's been a part of your own survival. It's been a part of making sure you don't have to feel certain feelings. It's been a part of, purely making sure other people are happy or other people are pleased. And a lot of times, especially as women, this can happen with men too, but especially with women, we put ourselves last. We put ourselves on the back burner. We make sure everybody else is okay, even if we're not okay. And we will lie to ourselves a lot of times and tell ourselves, we're okay, I'm good. As long as you're good, I'll be happy, right? But I think there really comes a point where we realize we're lying to ourselves and we realize the heaviness is too much and where we want to ask for help, but we're afraid. And I have a lot of consults like that. I have a lot of people that, I really feel like there is a step-by-step process. I feel like people listen to the podcast and they will get to an episode that really resonates with them and hits home. And when it finally hits home in a very deep way where they see themselves, then they'll schedule a consult, right? And that consult is that glimmer of hope that things can be different and that we really need help being seen on a different level. And there's one of two things that happens on a consult. Either people move forward scared shitless and say, I'm ready to be seen, I'm ready for the vulnerability, or they get totally freaked out what will happen or what will change in my life if I meet myself at my core, if I really learn who that is, if I heal these things that are so painful, if I tell myself the truth and tell these people that I'm, working with, whether that's individual or group, the truth. Do I even know my truth? Do I even know who I am? Those things, that process is so scary. But what I can tell you is that when I went through this process, while it was and is still the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'm sure all of my clients can vouch because they've all been here or they're here right now working on themselves, that what it also does is open the door to endless possibility. Like, it is incredible to crack yourself open enough to really learn who you are, what you want, what you need to heal from, how you need to be held accountable, what things you haven't seen, what other people can witness in us that can pull out such inspiration and drive and excitement and change within us. Vulnerability, I think, is a superpower. It's really, the work of it requires so much emotional intelligence work. It really is saying, I'm going to not only allow myself to crack open for the sake of learning who I am, but I'm going to crack myself open and be vulnerable and let other people see my mess, or let other people see the truth that maybe I've even ran from, or, for most of my life. And in them seeing me, what I will also learn is how to have my own back. Because it is true that maybe they will have judgments, maybe they will have thoughts and feelings, maybe we won't be on the same page, maybe they will abandon, maybe they will jump ship. But what is even more important is, who do I surround myself with, and how am I going to have my own back, and who do I have to grow into to really live in my truth rather than hide? Who do I have to step into, and what skills do I really have to develop to create the life I want, where I get to show up honest, and I get to be truthful, and I get to be transparent. And that really was my work early on. It was really feeling and learning how to be brave, and how to actually tell the truth and live my truth, and let people be judgmental, let people be wrong about me, let people misunderstand, let people love me, which is also hard for us sometimes. Sometimes whenever I really see my clients and I see their potential and I tell them how much they are loved and cared for, sometimes that just moves them to tears, because they have not heard that in a deep way, or they don't necessarily believe that they're worthy of that. And I'm here to tell you that you are, and that, life is just too short to be hiding. Life is too short to hold everything in. Life is too short to pretend. Life is too short to people please. Life is just too short. This is not your practice life. This is not a practice run. You don't get a practice run consciously, right? Like, this is it. You and your body right now, this is it. This is not your practice life. So if you listen to this and there's more inside of you, or you want to try to figure out what is inside of you because you've been surviving, or you've just been going with the motions on autopilot, or there's more for you to tap into, there's more for you to explore, or you need friends and women in your corner that understand and get it, or you need accountability, you need a mirror held up to your face, to see what maybe you haven't seen in order to step into everything that's possible for yourself, then I can't encourage you enough to take that step and to feel scared and do it anyways. And I think the first step is even just getting on the phone, right? Schedule a consult. Let's talk about where you are currently. Where do you want to be? And what I can possibly do to help you get there. And if you're ready, we can move forward. And if you're not ready, we don't have to, right? You are in charge of your life. You get to decide at any given moment. But let me just tell you that you're only ever one decision away from a completely different life. And that your life 1 year from today can look so incredibly different when you're willing to be vulnerable, when you're willing to be seen, when you are willing to look within and do the deep work. And will it feel hard? Abso-freaking-lutely. I am not going to lie, and I am not going to sugarcoat it. There's probably going to be a lot of tears and a lot of frustrations at times and a lot of WTF moments. But I will tell you, I've never met a single person who's gone inward and regretted it, ever. Never, ever. They always come out so much stronger and feeling so much better on the other side, even when it's the hardest thing they've ever done. So I hope that this episode of vulnerability helps you. And again, if I can help you, I would love for you to reach out. You can schedule a free 60-minute consult on MacyRenee.com anytime. And I would love to talk to you, and I would love to work with you one day should you feel like we might be a good fit. And I will tell you that if you are not on my email list, please make sure you do that. Again, you can find that on MacyRenee.com. I have some exciting announcements that will be rolling out soon on social media and via email and eventually the podcast. But if you want to make sure you don't miss it, you need to make sure you're on my email list. So, all right, this episode was longer than I thought. Sometimes I get on tangents and I can't stop and I just speak from the heart. They're never scripted. They're never pre-planned out. So I hope that this was helpful and was the message that someone out there in the world needed today. And I love you lots. I will see you next week. And I'm sorry that I did not have an episode for you last week. I was so sick, but I'm feeling much better. And I look forward to seeing you again. All right, bye. Hey there. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of This Is Not Your Practice Life podcast. If you'd like to connect on social media, you can find me on both Instagram and Facebook at Macy Renee Coaching. And if you want to stay up to date on all of my offers, announcements, and inspirational emails, you can join my email list at macyrenee.com. In addition, if there's a way that I can further support you in your coaching journey, you can schedule a free 60-minute consult at macyrenee.com anytime you want so we can discuss the best options for you. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope you have an amazing day. Bye.